Hello, Internet! Gino, that Pinguino Greco here again with another episode of Deep Listens. Today we're going to be talking about the Binding of Isaac, which means I have to be joined, as always, by Pete. I guess what's a good Binding of Isaac reference? Pete...
Samson? I'd take Samson.
Samson Busby?
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. So, hello, everybody. Glad to be on another episode of the podcast playing Binding of Isaac. This week, technically my pick. I was excited for the game. A little disappointed ultimately, and we'll find out why. So Gino was kind enough to tell me off air, here's a little inside baseball for you people, that there's been a request for additional animal facts. Gino, is that true?
Yes. Weirdly enough, when we had the Magic School Bus Explores the Ocean as one of our podcasts, we had some feedback about animals. We actually have emails about ocean law and farm fishing. Fishing. And a whole... We have emails. We're going to have an email show.
Nice.
Hopefully in the not too distant future. So get some emails in, and part of the feedback was we need more animal facts. Bring back that amazing feature. And so, okay. Pete, go ahead.
I'll hit him, tell you what, in honor of this new request, I'll hit him with two. All right? So one was just given to me by one of our esteemed colleagues, not to be named, doing a little independent research. So apparently scientists have recently discovered in the fossil record, I think what we could comfortably refer to the most yoked penguins of all time. Just some swole-ass penguins. Apparently they were 5'10", 220. That's
these
a yoked
penguins, These penguins could dunk.
They were putting in work. And apparently as, other marine mammals sort of rose up and took over the oceans, they were unfortunately pushed to the side, which is really too bad because, I'd love a 5'10", 220 penguin roaming around right about now.
Yes. Agreed. Wholeheartedly. I am kind of hurt that your independent analysis prevented me from doing the penguin fact, but that's fine. What is your second fact?
I apologize, but my second fact, right, I just recently read this. So apparently cheetahs are very nervous animals. Like they're high-strung, let's say, which makes sense because they're cheetahs. So when they're kept in captivity, a lot of time they'll give them Labrador puppies as companions. Because, puppies are super laid back, very chill, very comfortable around people. So the cheetah will pick up cues from its dog friend, and as it gets older, sort of internalize some of those behaviors, and it helps keep the cheetah calm, keeps the cheetah chill. It's basically like a support animal for a cheetah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Two good animal facts this week.
Well, thank you. Thank you, listeners. I think it was Superfan Kyle who suggested the return of animal facts. Thank you for that. And... without further ado, just a reminder, if you want to get in touch with the show, do so at Deep Listens Pod or at That Pinguino on Twitter. You can also hit up deeplistens.libsyn.com or deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. We will have a email episode coming up soon. It really depends when we meet that magical email threshold where we don't feel like it's an embarrassment to have an email show. So if you want to get in a question to make it on air, we have very low standards.
Yes.
So send in
anything really.
Anything really.
As
it does
long as
not
ends
have
in
to.
A question mark.
No, not anything. Hopefully a question, and we will trash bad emails. But if you wanted, general gaming question, anything about some of the themes we've gone over with our show, any of the games we've talked about in the past that you want us to hit on, something that you did not have in the initial episode, you did not hear us talk about, and I noticed we have some new listeners recently, so. For those folk, feel free to send in an email.
Please do.
And without further ado, it's time to talk about the Binding of Isaac. Hey, Pete, tell me about the Binding of Isaac.
Binding of Isaac. So, really I could just recite whatever the opening monologue is. Unfortunately, I didn't commit it to memory. But basically the premise of the Binding of Isaac is there's this young boy, Isaac, living alone with his mother. And his mother spends most of her time watching basically televangelists on TV, right? Sort of, Christian television stations. And one day she hears the voice of God telling her son's corrupted and needs to be saved. So it basically starts, she takes away all his worldly influences, right? His toys, his games, those sorts of things. Then she hears the voice again saying he's still corrupt. So she's like, all right, I'm going to have to lock him in his room. And then finally, the voice of God calls down, and in an allusion to the biblical story of Isaac, tells Isaac's mother she needs to sacrifice him, and she busts into his room holding a kitchen knife. Isaac finds a trap door and goes to this sort of basement dungeon area, and that's basically where the game picks up. You're young Isaac fighting his way through this dungeon, through a series of just not increasingly gruesome, because they start off very gruesome and just stay super gruesome, but very gruesome bosses and enemies, let's say.
Real gruesome, real gross.
Yep.
The Binding of Isaac.
Mm-hmm.
So this game is a roguelike. Every single playthrough in the dungeon, you start on the first floor of the basement, and you proceed down till eventually you come across your mom and have to confront her. And you have a few floors, basically, I think it's like 10 or so floors, to get enough items to hopefully defeat her. And if you die at any point, you are sent back to the top, start over fresh. Though this game does have a number of unlocks similar to roguelite games that we've played in the past that will change your experience as you keep, trudging through the dungeon. You'll unlock additional characters, additional items, and those items and characters. The characters will allow you to start with a fresh slate with a different moveset, slightly different, and then the items will just change what items spawn. So generally speaking, the longer you play this game, the better the options you'll have, or the wider range of experiences you'll have.
Sure.
But it might not necessarily be easier. It really depends on what the random seed gives you.
Yeah, it's for the most part different. I mean, some of the stuff is just flat out better, but, obviously not always.
Yeah. So the main gameplay here is it's kind of a twin stick shooter, except generally you move with WASD. I played on a computer. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, so did I.
Yeah, so you move with WASD and you shoot with the arrow keys.
Mm-hmm.
And you're basically shooting tears. Isaac cries, and the
Yes.
tears are weapons. And you're shooting generally at weird, like, poop monsters and blood and all sorts of... I would describe it as like a high schooler's notebook. It's made by the people who made Super Meat Boy.
Yeah. I would say, like, if you took... God, what was that game where you were that crusader and he had that cross stitched into his chest?
Dante's Inferno?
Yes, I should have known that. It's a book title. It's basically if you took Dante's Inferno and fed it through like a fourth grader's notebook. That's how I think of what you'd end up here with.
Yeah, if you took Dante's Inferno and then gave it to David Jaffe, the dude who made Twisted Metal.
Ooh, Twisted Metal. There's a good callback.
Yeah, it's like that. And that is pretty much what The Binding of Isaac is. And the gameplay, it's pretty fun. It's good as a roguelike. Mm-hmm. It's fun to play in short bursts, and occasionally you will get further and further in and discover new enemies, new mini-bosses, and then you'll eventually get skilled enough to make long runs just about every time.
Mm.
So what did you think of the game, just from a gameplay perspective?
From a gameplay perspective, I think, you sort of summed it up well. My disappointment mainly came from the story, which, we'll certainly get to. But it's fun enough. It has some interesting elements, sort of when you look at it as not an amalgamation, but a pastiche, let's say, of a whole bunch of different similar games that came before it. It was fine enough, I guess I would say. I did find the art style not just repellent, but sort of boring in its repellence after a while. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a lot of just kind of gross stuff, and some of it is kind of interestingly gross. Like, I found some of the meat monsters to be kind of interesting, or some of the sub-bosses, but some of the game is just, hey, here's poop. How do you feel about poop?
But what if the poop moves?
Oh, no, it's the poop shooting at me. I don't want to be killed by poop, and then it's like, you were killed by a poop.
Yep. It's a lot of sort of just stuff like that. And the items were, again, sort of this juvenile humor. Like, there's a coat hanger you can get, which isn't even really juvenile humor. That's just sort of gross and offensive in its way. And there are like pills. You can just take pills as you go. It's a lot of stuff like that.
And there's tarot cards. It's all over the place. Like, there's tarot cards. There are references to other video games. There are pills you can take.
X-ray specs.
Yeah. like P. You can get P tiers,
Yeah.
all sorts of like weird, gross shit. And really, I find that the base gameplay is not necessarily the draw. It's more the items and the weirdness that it really inflicts upon the game. That it leads to very different playthroughs. And I just wish that there was some sort of drop chart or something that I could. That way I could know what I was going to get or really prepare if I see one thing and then I'm going to see another thing. I really look forward to... I wish I knew,
What? Where am I?
What is that? What's going on?
Did somebody say drop charts?
Oh no, did we free him?
Is that? Did we say his name 3 times? Is this Beetlejuice?
Drop chart, drop chart, drop chart.
No!
I'm in some new place. My corporeal form is manifest, and now I'm here.
Listeners, we apologize, but it seems we've summoned the Grindfather.
It's good to be back. Hey, so what are you guys doing?
We're recording a podcast on the Binding of Isaac.
Oh, that's a pretty cool game. I played some of that.
Oh, you did? That's good.
What a weird coincidence.
Gosh, that's so crazy. Wait, were you guys talking about drop charts?
Yes.
Now that you mention it.
Oh, well, what kind of stuff have you learned about your drop chart? Because, I'd be happy to tell you what I learned.
I learned nothing. I was hoping that someone could explain to me because every game I was like, oh, hope this time it's good, but I don't really know.
Well, if you're talking about Binding of Isaac and you want to talk about drop charts, you unfortunately are going to have a pretty short conversation. To the best of my knowledge, I could not find any actual drop charts of any kind of probabilities or enemies dropping specific things. I do know that almost every every environment component that is breakable or interactable in the Binding of Isaac can spawn an item. That's pretty decent. You can blink tears out like some torches or little campfires that could spawn an item. You could just cry away some rocks that might spawn an item.
Yeah, you can
all kinds of things spawn items.
You can eventually learn that certain rocks are a different color than other rocks, and if you drop a bomb next to those rocks, they always have good stuff in them, but some rocks almost never have stuff in them. Or there's also secret rooms where it's like, oh, if there's like 2 rooms connected near each other, you just bomb the wall, and then there's a secret room in there. Sometimes it's got items, sometimes it's got enemies.
Yeah, there's no shortage of items.
No.
I mean, I wasn't always interested in what they were, but there's no shortage of them.
Yeah, the game really breaks depending on what items you get when. Mm-hmm. Like early on, I found that if you got a good first item or two, and then maybe, like generally speaking, after the bosses, you'll get an item that either increases your health or your damage. That tends to be what drops from bosses, which is just kind of your stable, hey, we're going to keep you roughly in line with where you should be. Even if you didn't get any of the other items, these health pickups will generally keep you powerful enough. Oh. And then
did you guys always make a conscious effort to clear the floor before going down? It seemed to me like that was really the key as well, is to make sure you hit every room before you proceeded to the next level.
Yeah.
That is a pretty big thing. In some of the other, I guess, probably the most recent roguelike or roguelite that we played was Dead Cells, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
I think it was a pretty important part of that game if you were going to play it one of 2 ways. Either play it for time, like in the Dead Cells time lock doors.
Right.
Or you play it to just sweep and get every resource you possibly can. And those 2 ways were equally valid, but you kind of have to play to the extremes. You're either blitzing through the game to get time doors and get bonuses that way, or you really have to clear almost the entire level to make sure you maximize your resources. I think something similar happens in Binding of Isaac, where every floor you're going through, the odds are just better and better. The more things you interact with, the more chances you have of getting some sort of run-changing item. In contrast, another rogue-like game, I believe Spelunky, isn't quite like that. If someone plays Spelunky, you're not necessarily trying to sweep every single level because every part of that level could murder you. So you kind of want to get some 1 or 2 key items and then be on your way.
And Spelunky punishes you for lingering. Spelunky, if you stay on a screen for too long, a ghost will come and it will kill you. Whereas in Binding of Isaac, once you clear a floor, you can even leave behind healing items and other things and not pick them up on the spot. And that way, if you run into trouble, you can backtrack and then heal yourself, which I found was the secret to long runs for me, was just getting into trouble, leaving a few hearts in some rooms where I didn't need them, and then doubling back after I had cleared all the rooms.
No, I didn't employ that. Well, let me say two things, right? One, I think it's worth saying just up front because we brought it up. I think Dead Cells is a much better version of this type of game, but I'm sure we'll talk about why as we move forward, whether or not you agree with me. But Gino, bringing up your subject, that's not a strategy I really employed. So if you half cleared a room, let's say, and left, did all the enemies respawn upon re-entry?
You usually can't leave a room unless you kill everything. The doors lock, and then
now that you say that, that's obvious.
You can bomb doors to leave without killing all the enemies, but when you do that, they are still there when you go back, and the doors lock again. So It's not really a thing where you're avoiding enemies. It's more a matter of if they drop a heart and you don't need it, bumping into the heart will just cause it to roll around on the ground, not heal you. And if you then need it after, say, a boss fight or something, you can always double back to that room and get whatever you left. Yeah. Or if you maybe didn't have an item that you needed to, like, blow up a rock to fill up some sort of hole in the floor, if you didn't have the bomb for that, you could come back after you get the bomb and the item will still be there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I found for me, this game, it's a lot of luck early on, at least until you unlock Cain. Did anyone unlock different characters other than Isaac?
Yeah.
Yeah, Cain's pretty easy to get. I think you just have to get, you have to just accumulate coins.
Yeah, 55.
It's like 50 coins, something like that, to get Cain.
Yeah, I found Cain to be game breaking.
Why do you think Cain's game breaking?
So Cain starts with the Lucky Foot, which is an item that increases your luck, which means that anytime you gamble in the vending machines.
Weird item for Cain to have.
Yeah, I don't know. This game's biblical interpretation is not the most accurate.
Not the best exegesis I've ever seen. We'll talk about that a little bit later on too.
Yeah, so Cain with the Lucky Foot, if you use any of the slot machines or the machines that you feed hearts to and they give you money, or any of the kid you can give money to, who's there's a poor kid who will take your money and occasionally they'll give you items. You have a much higher chance of those things going your way when you're Cain. And so with Cain, I generally got better drops, and then because those items, if you keep feeding money into the slot machine, eventually it will explode. It'll give you a random chance of blowing up and giving you $1, which gives you 99 coins.
$1, that's big.
Yeah, and once you have 99 coins, that means you can basically buy every item that you see from then on out. But it also means that you can play every slot machine you see from then on out and cause it to explode. And generally speaking, the exploding slot machines will, if they don't just give you a ton more money, they'll give you a lot of pills, and the pills will give you permanent status upgrades, and so it just keeps feeding you all of these upgrades, one after one after one. The same thing can happen with the blood machine. When the blood machine explodes, it gives you a packet of blood that increases your health permanently. The beggar kid will sometimes just give you items and then vanish forever. So being able to exploit every arcade you come across with Cain just makes it way more likely that you'll get good items.
So I didn't think about it like that, which is interesting because normally I'm the person who would find the game-breaking exploit. But when I thought about Lucky Foot as an item, maybe I misinterpreted it, but I thought it would give you more, maybe increase item drop rates, or make certain breakables give items or coins more often. I didn't think about it in terms of the actual NPC interactables, and I was calling the arcade like an NPC sort of thing.
Yeah. So what happens is I think it does that too. I think it also gives you more likely drops. But the big thing is that it gives you just these extra chances at items. And when you're not going to lose, did you guys ever beat Mom?
Yeah. I managed to, like, once.
I did
Yeah.
not.
I did as well, and once after like playing it for not for a very long time, and the first time I played it again, I beat her the first try. But the big difference was I started with Kane, and I got an item called I think it's like the pharmacist's something. It's a doctor's mask that makes it so that you can only get good pills. And then from there, I basically just kept hitting up the vending machines, and it just kept feeding me good pills. So like health up, health up, health up, range up, damage up. And then I just annihilated everything. And it's all because of luck
And pills,
and pills.
just like in the Bible.
Yeah. There's also secondary items that we didn't really talk about. They're like items that you can use, and then after killing a certain number of enemies, they recharge, and then you can use them again.
Mm-hmm.
And they vary. In
Yeah,
terms
there's
of
like a
usefulness.
shield.
Did we talk about the different types of items, like ones that are just stat increasing, ones that are like one-time use, ones that are like active items?
Yeah, we talked about the active items. We've described some passives, and then there's the pills and the tarot cards, and each of those do something special as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right, but so like generally, any run. I mean, everybody has access to bombs. I think you can have like your bombs in your
you
inventory.
start
There's
with-
like a bomb button.
Mhm.
Isaac starts with one. Some other characters trade that starting item for something else. And then you can have, I think it's an unlimited number of just like modifiers on you, but then you can only have like one active item. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have like an item that you're kind of holding as like your equip, but you can pick up things along the way that will say like, you know, this modifies your move speed. This, this modifies your range or your attack speed. These things typically can just be stacking on top of you as your run goes through. But there's one item that you have, which is your active item, and it can be something like a temporary better attack or a defensive item or like teleport or something like that.
Yeah. Those are all useful, but ultimately I think the passives were what really were game changers, because the active items, they're usually single use, and outside of a few that do just a ton of damage and can help you clear a room instantly, most of the time you're just shooting the regular shots.
Yeah, because that's the thing too. I mean, it's not. In a lot of cases, clearing the rooms isn't particularly short. So when you have these sort of like shield items or something, a lot of times I found them wearing out on me before I even got through whatever room I had activated it in.
Yeah. Some of them are just like a big explosion or something, like that, that's only really useful for killing enemies
Mm-hmm.
and boss fights. So what were some standout items that you guys saw?
One thing I liked was the magnet items. Underrated, but I found that whenever there was an
Underrated
item,
by who?
I don't know.
Like, what are these big lists of Binding of Isaac items you're looking at?
I feel like that would go easily unnoticed because it didn't help you kill things.
Fair.
It's really good because later on in the game they put a lot more gaps between you and the items, and
Yeah,
the magnet
that's what I was
brings them.
saying. Like it helps you complete the level more, but it doesn't help you kill stuff. It just kind of enables you to farm in the second half of the game.
Yeah, I found the ladder to be really useful.
Yeah.
It just lets you clear gaps if they are one block wide.
That was good. My favorite, I'll say an offensive item then, because we were sort of focusing mostly on more of the passive ones. I liked the butcher knife a lot as sort of like my offensive weapon. I don't know if you guys used it, but it replaced your tears with basically a butcher knife that acted as a boomerang. So you'd throw it out and then it'd come back. So it shortened up your range fairly considerably, but it hit enemies twice and dealt pretty solid damage.
That's pretty good. I got one that was called like technology, and it gave Isaac a laser eye, and it
Yeah.
hit everything in a straight line.
That one's good too.
That one was pretty dang good.
Yeah.
There was also one that was like psychic shots or something that they pass through enemies instead of dying, and they just keep going in a direction. That was pretty good as well. Really, any of the upgrades on your tiers tend to be pretty good.
You can also get, there's like a whole suite of items that's just like a little companion you have that will also shoot tiers of its own.
Like a little fly or bug or something like that that will float around and blink with you.
Yeah, a lot of the times they're even smaller children, like babies.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
fitting with the overall aesthetic of the game.
Mm-hmm. There was one that I liked, and his name was Lil Haunt.
What did he do?
That was a good one. He chases enemies, and it's like if he touches them, it deals 2 damage on contact, and then it causes a fear effect. So it can help you with like crowd control
Very
if
good.
enemies are getting all up on you.
Yeah, I liked Dead Bird. It didn't do anything until you got hit, but once it got hit, it just flew up on enemies and just kept damaging them constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And it keeps it. Then you don't need to worry about attacking. The bird will take care of all.
There was an item that was the D20.
Yep.
Did you guys see that one? It if you use it, it takes the items that are on the ground and like re-rolls what they are.
Yeah.
And you can check. You're like, oh man, I got that. I don't need that item. I don't need any more hearts. I'm full health right now. Or, and you say, oh, I'll just pop my D20 and I'll re-roll it to some other drop.
Yeah, and this just gets back to a point, bring up the D20 that we made earlier. It's a really weird vibe that the game has, I guess, like between grim and gross and just sort of funnily pop culture references. Like it's odd. Like I'm not really sure what it's trying to accomplish necessarily.
Yeah, it's pulling from all the inspirations, and there's no real thematic consistency. And it's a weird game for that reason.
Yeah.
Like, some of it's funny, some of it's just kind of gross. It's very internet, I should say.
It is,
But
it
not
is very
like-
internet.
Not in the Undertale way. Like I
No.
hated Undertale for its internetness, and I don't like this game either, in part because of its internetness. But at least in Undertale, it was, vaguely in line with the overall aesthetic of the game.
Yeah, they were going for something with Undertale.
Yeah.
And here, I think they are definitely going for something, but it is kind of more juvenile. Which is fine.
And I think-
like, there's nothing wrong with that.
What's unfortunate, and I don't know if this is unfortunate, but it's something that I notice and I take note of. But The Binding of Isaac was a really successful game, and lots of people played it like on
Yeah.
Twitch and had YouTube channels based on this game when it originally came out. And so the game did really well. But Undertale did really well also. But I wish that games like this didn't have to cater to its cuteness factor or its internet subculture factor so much. I wish a game could just have depth without having to reach into the crude or distasteful.
Yeah, and I think it's just part of the aesthetic for Team Meat. Or I don't know if this is actually a Team Meat game. I know some of the Super Meat Boy people worked on this game.
While you fact check that, if you want to, this overall. So I mentioned one of the items re-rolling the drops on the floor. The D20 item actually brings up a point that I wanted to make about Binding of Isaac and how it is in contrast to some of the other rogue style games that we've played. So, a lot of the games that I think of when I think of a roguelike game, they do have some kind of random element to them. It will either be like procedurally generated levels, or there could be a different series of bosses. Like maybe you don't know the order of bosses that particular run. There will be some kind of unknown, and that's what will make the game, like the runs, unique. And those roguelites have a problem of maybe if you play 100 of the runs or 1,000 of the runs, maybe you will have seen sort of every option. That's not. I don't think that's a huge problem for those games. But in Binding of Isaac, I feel like this game had a little bit too much random. Like, the game overall was pretty similar. You started on the first basement floor and you went down until you fought Mom, and you had either enough modifiers and equips and items or you didn't, and it was really hard. But to me, I had a hard time using my skill to mitigate the random. And part of it was because the control scheme was pretty simplistic. I'm really not knocking the control scheme, but if you're only going to have WASD controls and like basically only an 8-directional shoot system, it's kind of hard to mitigate to mitigate luck with skill. And other rogue style games, like even Dead Cells, for example, we bring it up again only because it's the most recent example that we've played. If you get bad items in Dead Cells, you can still have an enriching game because you have to learn how to use that item or learn how to use those modifiers you have, and it gives you random that you apply skill to make it work. But in this game, you can just get like items that have no synergy, and your run just kind of ends. That's something that I didn't really like as much. Plus the fact that you can only have one equip item at a time, so it's a little bit weird.
Billy, I think you're right to point to that. I think it's a problem that you're astute to point out, but I think you also make the right point when you say part of this is due to the simplicity of the controls, right? And I think the game would be very well served by just, let's make spacebar a dodge or like a roll or something, right? It doesn't have to be complicated. Just give me something that lets me sort of fast twitch my way out of some of these issues.
Yeah,
like one of the item modifiers that I thought was the best, and it wasn't even that great, but it made your tears homing.
Yeah,
and
that one's pretty good.
It didn't even work that well. Like they didn't just magnet to all the enemies. They just like kind of curved a little bit, but it was still like game changing because if you really only have like the 8 sort of cardinal directions, like up, down, left, right, and then like the combination of each 2, that can put you in weird sour spots of not being able to hit enemies. But just having that for some of the bosses that were more like bullet hell style bosses just completely changed how the game was played.
Yeah, and there were plenty of weapons, like if they drew a straight line or did anything like that, it just made lining shots up way easier. Though I found that there was a little bit of precision control where the bullets take your momentum of whichever way Isaac is moving.
Yeah, just a little bit.
And so you can kind of like run to the right and shoot at the right time, and the bullet will keep moving and curving, which like you can mitigate some of the wonkiness, but at the end of the day, you're kind of limited by the controls. And something that I noticed a lot. Oh, sorry, it came and went. I think my point came and went.
Well,
I'm sure if it's really important, it'll come back to you.
Let me make a general point though on this. I'm not going to fact check it myself because I'm pretty sure of it. But this game was produced in something like a week, right? So I think the obvious response we might get from listeners is, well, what do you expect? They made this game in a week. But I mean, that's sort of a fallacious argument when you think about it, because I mean, they didn't have to. Like, we have to sort of take the game on its merits as it was released. So maybe, they should have taken that 8th day and put out, despite the biblical significance of creating something in 7 days, maybe they take that 8th day, and on the 8th day they create a dodge mechanic.
Well, on the 8th day I should say, in the years afterwards, they released multiple updates and different versions and stuff. And let me correct, this was not a Team Meat game. This was an Edmund McMillan game, but he was one of the members of Team Meat, the team that made Super Meat Boy. So what I actually had on the tip of my brain was there are some enemies that jump and enemies that move into another plane, which the game generally operates where everything's isometric and you're kind of moving in the 4 cardinal directions. Or not isometric. It's flat and you're moving in the 4 cardinal directions. But it kind of becomes a little isometric when things jump and are able to avoid your shots because they're technically, quote unquote, in the air, but your bullets are like clearly passing near them. So the hitboxes can be a little wonky, especially enemies that, there's some enemies that are like headless, armless, jumping bean looking things.
Yeah.
And they can be very hard to hit because you can only really hit them when they're on the ground, even though when they're jumping, sometimes they jump directly in front of where you're shooting, but they're technically in the air, so you can't hit them. And it especially becomes egregious when you've got weapons that fire in a straight line or have arcs that seem like they should mitigate the in the air effect. Like when I had the beam weapon, I had enemies jumping directly in front of the beam, but the beam would pass through them and not damage them because they were not on the right plane. Which the game doesn't... There's no jumping for Isaac that I noticed.
No, none that I saw, at least.
Yeah, so one of the other mechanics we didn't really touch on is the deals with the devil, which you sometimes get offered.
Mm-hmm.
Those tend to be pretty interesting and can warp your playthrough pretty significantly. They generally involve you sacrificing health in return for either a powerful upgrade or like turning regular health into stone hearts, which once they're gone, versus red hearts, which you can heal. So there's trade-offs that the game allows you, and some of those trade-offs are worth it, some of them very much not. It really depends on your playthrough, whether you want to engage with those. Like sometimes if a playthrough's gone sideways, you just go for the high variance.
Yeah, take a shot. And, it obviously depends on where you are at that point, if you have health to spare, so you feel.
So Pete, I just went and did just a quick research on the development cycle. From what I was able to gather, and this is just really like surface level research, apparently the initial prototype of the game was the result of like a week-long just game programming camp that people got together and did like a think tank type thing or like a camp, and they had a rough iteration of Binding of Isaac done in the week. The actual development took, I think it looks like about 2-3 months, but Macmillan, I think that's the person's name. Yeah, Macmillan was like, oh yeah, Super Meat Boy did really well. I'm not really afraid of taking risks, and let's just make something kind of fun. And I'm not afraid of toilet humor, and I am going to draw from inspirations of games that I like. So let's just put this out, and didn't expect it to be wildly successful. Right. But then the game ended up being very popular among a now large and loving fan base.
And I think that's my problem with the game, right, is, if we can do just a little bit of story here, right? Maybe it's worth just very brief overview of the actual biblical story of Isaac. Abraham, sort of the father of Judaism and therefore the father of monotheism, right? God calls down and tells Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. Abraham's sort of like, I don't know about this whole thing, God, but he's like, all right, if you say so. So he takes Isaac up to this altar and he's about to sacrifice him, and then God yells down, no, don't actually do it. You've proven your faith. You can spare your son. And then together they sacrifice a ram. Right? That's the biblical story of Isaac.
Sacrifice this ram instead.
Yeah, it's basically its horns are caught in a thorn bush, and they go over, snag it, and kill it, right? So that's the biblical story this is alluding to. Now, I think this game wants to sort of have it both ways, right? In calling this story The Binding of Isaac and, setting up this overt religious message, it wants to, one, create this sort of, at the very least, meaningful, not necessarily deep, critique of religion, right? It wants to say something about it. But then it sort of immediately veers into this sort of, gross out, fun time humor.
Toilet humor.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
And it can't have it both ways, especially when it's setting up this, there are a million reasons to critique organized religion, right? Especially if you're starting from a premise where God wants you to kill your son. But in doing so, it just sets up this straw man version of religion to sort of poke fun at. It's not saying anything particularly interesting about it.
Yeah, and the game only goes further when you beat bosses, you generally get things from Mom, like Mom's underwear, Mom's pills.
You can get
like
Mom's
all these
Tampax at a certain point.
Yeah, and it just becomes, it's just gross out stuff. Like the idea that this is in any way a critique on religion falls away pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's
like
fully
the cutscene. The cutscene at the beginning of the game is the biggest critique on religion that I saw.
Not to mention that a lot of the monsters are just a poop monster.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to draw any sort of like allegorical message when it's punctuated by feces or blood or urine attacking me. There
are sub-bosses that are the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse from Revelation.
Yeah, but throw it in there.
Yeah, they're just cool enemies, right? Like, there's not anything done with them.
Now, I don't want to let the game...
You can fight the 7 deadly sins also, and they are also just kind of random mini-bosses.
They're like the Koopa brothers, but just with sin names.
I'm not gonna try to shoot down your point, Pete.
Good.
I think.
Don't.
I mean,
I love the idea that the Koopalings they're also the seven deadly sins.
Like
Bowser Jr., gluttony, lust, Lenny.
but I agree that if the game is trying to draw an analogy here, draw some kind of allegory between these like religious undertones and the journey of the protagonist with his mom, then I could see an argument that the juxtaposition between that stuff and this toilet humor makes neither of them work really well. I just don't know if the game was really trying to do that. That's not a good thing either, because if the game didn't have a clear goal in mind, and that just may be true because it came out of this like weak, brain tank camp of let's just get a couple of people together and see what we can make in a week, and then it turned into a side project essentially. I think it was developed sort of as like a part-time thing. Then I don't want to hold that too much against them, in a similar sense that I can only be so mad at Charles Barkley Shut Up and Jam Gaiden. I can only be so mad at that game because it was made by two guys in a basement,
with no expectation.
Yeah,
of
with
return
no
on
money
investment.
or expectations. I mean, Binding of Isaac wasn't as extreme as Charles Barkley, but it was also just like a passion side project. And the people that made this game probably said, "Oh yeah, let's just make something weird, like some weird Zelda roguelite sort of also Metroidvania style with just toilet humor. Yeah, sure, whatever, man. It'll be fun." And then, oops, it got successful. So now we have to critique it like it's a AAA game or something. Like I feel like your point is well made, but maybe like misdirected at them, but more of like an unfortunate side effect of how the game just was built. And
I mean, I would say if you're going to invoke something serious, like it's a pretty significant religious tale that they're invoking and trying to base the game off of. You don't have to have a serious critique. I don't think the game does. I think the game picked this as a setting and used it as the basis for some light humor and surprisingly tight gameplay. For as many critiques as I have, it's floaty, it doesn't feel super great all the time, but this is a game that I would call it a pretty good podcast game or a game when you're watching something else. It's fine to start playing it and turn your brain off and just see how far you can get. And that's totally fine. Those games should exist. And I'm happy that this one did. I've played it for... How many hours have I played this game for? I've played The Binding of Isaac for 14 hours. That's a lot of hours. And almost the entire time that I was playing The Binding of Isaac, I was doing something else. Or, I just snuck some playing in to try and beat it. And, it's fun to explore.
There's especially a lot of hours for a game that's like, I don't know, $5 on Steam right now, $6.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But Billy, I think your point's well made, right? And in a vacuum, I would agree with it, right? It's not necessary for a game to be anything more than just a fun diversion. But I think I would take Gino's point. I'm just sort of making it a little bit more hard line, where once you decide to call your game The Binding of Isaac and you open it with an explicit retelling of that story, you incur certain responsibilities, right? You've now situated your game into a literary, liturgical, historical, right, religious tradition that you're now responsible for through your own actions, right? So it's at that point you can no longer be equally frivolous. You have both privileges and responsibilities when you make an illusion like that.
And I guess if they were going to just staple together religious themes and toilet humor, that probably could have been done better.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't think they could have had, let's say, religious overtones to the game without explicitly situating it in the story of Abraham and Isaac.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, jumping topics really quick, there's a couple of things that I wanted to just bring up that I really enjoyed about this game. One of the things that is a major component of Binding of Isaac is the bombs in your inventory and what role bombs play in the various runs of Binding of Isaac. This is definitely an homage to the original Legend of Zelda game, where Link would have bombs and would just place them up near suspicious-looking walls and generate doors, or place them between suspicious rocks and generate a cave, because the devs thought that would be a cool place to put a cave. And in a lot of respects, the original Legend of Zelda game, the people put hours into that game bombing every single tile of rooms just to make sure they didn't miss anything. Like that game got mapped out. So that was a huge part of the original Legend of Zelda game. I think this is a definite nod to that style. This game is built very much like the dungeons of the original Legend of Zelda game. Absolutely. And the fact that bombs themselves have their own inventory slot and button makes me feel pretty good. It makes and the fact that they're not as common as they are in a Legend of Zelda game. I only had like maybe 2 or 3 bombs in my inventory at one time. Mm-hmm. There are some pickups where there's like a tiny cluster of bomb pickups, and so maybe you could have 4, 5, or 6 of them at once, but I typically use them whenever I felt a suspicion based on my years and years of Zelda Spidey sense, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, the game rewards that.
The game does reward that big
time. Puts the doors there. Mm-hmm. Like, the doors are where you think they are, generally speaking.
Almost any game, too, would be improved by the inclusion of bomb chews. Didn't get any in this game.
We didn't get any bomb chews.
Always a good addition.
Well, so I wanted to sort of examine the ways that this game as a roguelike borrowed from some of the other titles. In many of the roguelites that I've played, you don't really get. I'm trying to say this carefully. In a lot of the other roguelites that I played, they can vary from being side-scrolling to Metroidvania-style games to dungeon-crawling games like Diablo. There's a lot of different variations of what you would call a roguelike. And this game takes another approach of the old-school, like, NES dungeon crawler. Similar to Rogue itself, actually. And I think that it is successful in that adaptation, but it feels more like... It actually makes this feel more like a Flash game or like an HTML, like browser-based game, because of the sort of blockiness of each room. Makes it feel a lot like the original Legend of Zelda game. But I can't help but thinking, as I was playing it, I didn't feel like I was playing a roguelike game, because there wasn't that sort of like world aspect. It was really just blocks and rooms. So I lost a bit of the roguiness of it, because games like Dead Cells, games like Spelunky, games like there are certain variations of like Torchlight, I think is another roguelike game where it has like a hardcore mode. Games like that have like a hardcore mode where if you die it's permadeath. I would consider those roguelikes as well to a certain extent. I didn't feel like I was in that world because of how this level system was set up and some of the elements that made this game what it was. How'd you guys feel about it in context of other rogues? Did it seem like it fit in as a rogue game, besides just the fact that when you die you start over?
Yeah, I would say so. Go ahead.
It has the key, right? But I think one of the strengths of roguelikes, at least from like again, you're going to get tired of hearing us say this, but at least from a Dead Cells perspective, right, is that there's more of an explicit reward for making it further in the game because you have that sense of exploration, right? For this game, really my only reward in that sense was seeing new bosses, right? Because
all seeing new items.
Yeah, or seeing new items, right? Because all the levels are the same. Eventually, all the base enemies are the same, right? You've seen them all at a certain point.
And the bosses eventually repeat, too.
Yeah, eventually the bosses even repeat, right? So the only thing you're really benefiting from is, okay, maybe on the next floor I'll get to see a new boss. And again, that's only interesting if you've really sort of I shouldn't say only, but it's more interesting if you've really bought into the style this game wants to advance.
I mean, I feel like actually Devil Daggers made me feel more roguelike than this game did, because I'm trying to get further in Devil Daggers so I can see what like nightmare fuel skull tentacle monster is going to come at me next. But I didn't feel like I was really exploring new stuff in Binding of Isaac. I felt like I was just going through the mechanical motions of clear the level, get my perks, move on, prepare myself for mom, and that was kind of it. And we do that in Dead Cells because we are trying to fight a big boss at the end, so we are trying to condition ourselves. But each time the world is procedurally generated, new interactions occur, like new environmental things occur, and that's cool. There's like new NPCs that show up and new like mini boss. I mean, like I just feel like,
and like you said, if you go this
something was missing.
Whole new paths open up to you as well.
Yeah, like some part of the exploration or world building was missing in Binding of Isaac for me, that I kind of missed from other games that were roguelikes.
Yeah, I would say that ultimately the thing with the Binding of Isaac for me that makes me kind of agree with you a little bit, Billy, is that there is not some large challenge that you're actually looking to see. Even as you get further into the dungeons, the nature of the challenges you're up against are very similar to the ones you faced on the first level because you're getting upgraded as you go. You're basically staying at status quo or at par with the things you're facing, and it's not necessarily because the things you're facing are that different or that strategically interesting. It's that they deal more damage now. Or they don't actually deal more damage. They take more hits to kill, to get off the screen, or they have death effects that when you kill them, they do a thing that's hard to avoid. And that's, I think, kind of similar to in Dead Cells, since that's a game we've played early on, in earlier revisions of that game, they used the same enemy types in multiple levels more often, and then it felt like, oh, I'm just killing the same thing, but it's got more health points. But as they've revised it more and more, they've created new iterations of enemies, new styles, and the enemies actually need to be approached differently. Whereas in this game, ultimately you only have one way to interact with your enemies. There's just
blinking tears at it, yeah.
Shoot tears at it. And they're operating on the same plane, and there's not a lot of even space within each of the rooms for strategic approaches. So I think that ultimately makes the game a little bit more limited. It's going for a much narrower focus, but I think that it's a lot more masterable, and when you actually have full control over this game, there's a lot more ability to, just through sheer skill, I feel like you can actually deal with your enemies a lot better in this game because you've got so you can master your opponents so much better, and the game doesn't tend to throw that much bullshit at you at once, I found.
So when I think about Devil Daggers, another rogue style game that we played, I don't even know if I call it a roguelike, because it's really just an endurance run kind of game. But I mean, there is permadeath and restart, so I mean, like, it's pretty close. That game has the exact same way to interact with enemies too. It's really just shoot devils out of your hand. I mean, you do end up
daggers.
Sorry, yeah. You shoot daggers at devils. There's devils. There's daggers. That's the whole game.
That's
the
it.
devils
That's
need to be daggered.
Mm-hmm. And that game still developed and got a little bit different as the levels went on and on and on. And it was a little bit more than just having different enemies or a recolor or a reskin, right? Next game, Dead Cells, in its earlier iterations, like its really, really early release of the game, did just have recolors. And they just upped the enemy's hit points. But that game did have updates. And it did introduce new artwork for these new enemy types that were supposed to be there the whole time, but maybe they didn't, have a fully finished
development game
product.
It's an in-development game, so they were actively making those art assets at the time.
Right.
Though I think the Binding of Isaac in its later iterations have definitely it has breathed some life into the game by adding new items and a couple of new features through re-releases. But I think ultimately this game was made in a short time frame. It had a pretty fun loop, and then that was kind of it. And I think that's totally okay.
But here's the thing: if there was Binding of Isaac, the first original vanilla game, and it had as much success as it did, I feel like there was a missed opportunity for adding in Binding of Isaac Rebirth and Afterbirth, whatever the sequels were, I forget. But well, I think it's called. Well, there's like Wrath of the Lamb, maybe. I'm looking at some other stuff, but if there were re-releases and they were, in some cases, years later, why wouldn't there be a little more investment in growing the game more? It seems like, I mean, let's think of another game that has a similar iteration. Like, here's a really good example. Though it's not a roguelike game, but the I Want to Be the Guy games. Those games aren't procedurally generated, so there is a set level every time you play through the game. But it also has very limited interaction, just your weird little pistol that shoots. And that game's also full of hot bullshit and weird humor. But they took the next iterations of those games and said, "Here's what really worked. I'm gonna do that better and tweak the stuff that didn't work." And the game evolved. And I don't feel like Binding of Isaac evolved that much. No. It seems like, and someone, if I'm wrong about this, somebody write and then just tell me that I'm a fucking idiot. But
even if he's not wrong, right?
Yeah. Still
phrase it as a question though, so we can use it for the question episode.
Right. And so it seems like when they iterated new additions to Binding of Isaac, we only added new item interactions, didn't really create any new depth of the game. Because I mean, it could have been so easy to add like a dodge button.
Don't never say it could have been so easy.
I know. I am not a game dev.
It's worth remembering too. Like, I have no idea what some of those other games retail for, but it's worth remembering the price point here too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for what you get, Binding of Isaac is really cheap, right? Like Gino just said, he poured about 14 hours into it. That's what, 50 cents an hour, 30 cents an hour, right? This game is cheap, right? And like, so maybe it does
deals.
Yeah. Right?
The fun per dollar perspective is really high.
It's pretty good, yeah. For this, it's solid. I mean, despite all the complaints, right?
You can make that argument for a game like Dota, which is free to play.
Well,
and now
Dota
you're in real trouble.
Could, but
I'm not
actively punishing yourself.
Yeah, I'm not going to make the argument about money, experience per dollar, because I don't measure my enjoyment in those terms.
I do.
But I think
I have a big hourglass that I just like flip over, and it just ticks my fun as it goes down.
Yes, but for me, my experience is basically: did I have a good time with this game? How long did I have a good time with it? Did I take anything out of it? And I think from this game, I mostly took some good design lessons. I think that this game has a good loop. It has some clever designs with the item pickups, and that's all I really needed. And I think it's efficient, like Devil Daggers. That game is like 30 seconds. If every playthrough, unless you're really good, can be like 30 seconds. And you know what? Those 30 seconds are white knuckle.
Yeah, they're hectic.
They're freaking intense.
They are intense, and damn if that isn't a good game. And you maybe, that first 30 seconds or so, it might not be that different from playthrough to playthrough to playthrough, but it is engaging as hell for that time. And, I'm not going to play that game ever again, I don't think. Or maybe I'll play it one day, like a little bit for a stream or something. But I'm glad that game exists in the state it's in, even though it's not everything to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of it for our Binding of Isaac discussion. I think it's a good game, but limited.
Yeah, I think it's good, but I was ultimately disappointed in it from a literary perspective, which is perhaps an unfair critique, but it's the one I like to make, so I did.
Yeah, it asked for it.
Yeah,
I also have fun playing Binding of Isaac. Where my disappointment was, I wish that I could mitigate more luck using skill like I can do in some other roguelike games.
Fair. Yeah, I think these are all fair points.
Yep. So that's the Binding of Isaac. And if you want to get in touch with the show and tell Billy that he's a frickin' idiot,
Please
you can do so at Deep Listens Pod or at That Pinguino on Twitter. deeplistens.libsyn.com. We've got our comment sections and deeplistenspodcast@gmail.com. And since Billy's back, it's time for him to pick a game.
Dun, dun, dun.
Welcome back, Billy.
Whew, man, it's good to be back. Thank you for summoning me with the discussion of drop charts. I don't know how else I would have made it. I don't know how else I would have found my way back without that beacon of
Just reaching through the
just
ether.
like drop rates.
It's like in the beginning of Kingdom Hearts where Sora, he's standing on the beach and then he looks up and he sees himself falling and then he falls backwards and he's the guy who's falling.
Oh man, that's
that game
me.
can
But
teach us so much about life.
into drop rates.
The drop
Well, so
charts
yeah.
was what did it.
Thanks everybody for being patient. I did take some time off. Wanted to get a couple of work-life balance things settled, and things have really chilled out. I'm happy to jump back into the show where I belong. I missed you guys a lot, and I missed the
Glad to have you
community.
back. I missed
Yeah.
you too.
Yeah, man. So let's play a fun game. The game that I like to play for the next podcast is a free-to-play game. It was in early access for a long time. It just got its full release last month. I like to play a game called Battle Right. This is from what I've played so far, this is a game that I really hope takes off and becomes successful and becomes competitive and grows into a really well-developed scene. The general idea is that it is a 2 versus 2 or a 3 versus 3 arena brawler. Imagine a game like Dota or League of Legends or any kind of MOBA, but you take away all the farming and laning and items, and you only have the team fights. And it's a best of 5 rounds. So
We got rid of all the trash.
you got rid of all the garbage parts of those games and just kept the good stuff in just really nice, tight, fast-paced combat. And I'm looking forward to it. I have had a bunch of fun playing this game. I actually was one of the early promoters in its early access, and it is really good. I'm excited.
Let's do it.
All right,
I'm excited
glad to hear
too.
it. I'm excited as well. And just something that is not Deep Listens related, I actually appeared recently on an episode of Hardcore Gaming 101's top 47,858 games of all time. They required my assistance with Brave Fencer Musashi and Magic Pendule, The Quest for Color.
Excellent.
So,
Two games that couldn't be more worthy.
Yep.
Of appearing on that list. That
Especially Magic
specific list.
Pendule.
yeah, so if you want to catch me on that, I was on their December 2nd episode, lending my expertise. So if you needed more Magic Pendule discussion,
I mean, if
managed.
you need more discussion about weird, like, geopolitical rulers pulling guns on children,
Right.
then
A strong contender for best twist. Our year-end podcast.
Yeah,
this year.
and next week will be our Game of the Year podcast. So we will be adding.
man, next
Binding of
week?
Isaac to, yeah, we're
Wow.
gonna record it we're gonna record it this weekend and then put it up next week, I believe. That's the plan.
glad I came back just in the nick of time. Whew.
Yes, yeah, it is definitely on the best twist list. The Magic Pendule. It's gonna be hard to unseat that, but this is a
man.
tough year.
This is
tough year,
going to be a
This
tough
is
year.
a strong
Well,
year.
is this our second or third
This is our third.
Third.
This is our
This is the
third
time we've done it, yeah.
Goaty? Oh my god!
Yeah.
Oh.
We're aging. We're dying.
Wait, how
slowly.
long have we been running? What, May 2015?
Something like that.
Holy shit! We're coming on our third year.
Yeah,
We're established.
Wow.
we're still friends
Whoa.
against all odds.
And we're
That's
still
the biggest
edgy.
twist
We're
right
still
there.
in the vanguard.
Yeah, we're out here. We're dropping mixtapes
We're bleeding edge.
at the back of the truck. All right. Well, till next time, listeners. Thank you for putting up with us. Till next time. Thank you, Billy.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. I'm glad to be back. Binding of Isaac was fun. I'm looking forward to Goaty next week.
Thank you, Pete.
Always a pleasure. Glad to have some listeners to enjoy our ramblings as well.
Write emails. Talk to
Yeah,
us.
do that. Do
For
that.
the email episode. Until next time. Peace.